The note was waiting for me on the bathroom mirror. 3 words would have been enough to make me suspicious. Instead, my sisters had written 6. Don't make plans today. Trust us. I stared at the message for several seconds. Then I noticed the signatures. Emma. Lily. 2 names. 2 completely different handwriting styles. One very bad feeling. I looked at myself in the mirror. Messy red hair. Oversized t-shirt. Sleep still clinging to my face. Nothing about my reflection seemed unusual. And yet, something about that note made the back of my neck prickle. My sisters were dangerous enough on their own. Emma was the planner. Lily was the accomplice. Together, they were a natural disaster with a shared calendar. I pulled the note from the mirror, folded it, and headed downstairs. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, I knew I'd made a mistake. They were waiting for me. Both of them sat at the table. Both of them were smiling. Matching smiles. I stopped in the doorway. No. Emma raised an eyebrow. No what? Whatever you're planning, no. Lily placed a hand dramatically over her heart. That's hurtful. You're both smiling. We're allowed to smile. Not like that. Emma glanced at Lily. Lily glanced at Emma. I pointed at them. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. They burst out laughing. I should have turned around. I should have gone back upstairs. Instead, I sat down. My first mistake. Emma immediately pushed a mug of coffee toward me. My second mistake was accepting it. Lily slid a plate of pancakes across the table. I stared at the food. Then at them. What do you want? Nothing, Emma said. Absolutely nothing, Lily added. I narrowed my eyes. You're terrible liars. That's not true, Lily said. Remember when you believed the neighbor was secretly famous? He had a blue car. That is not evidence. It was a very suspicious blue car. Emma started laughing again. I wasn't amused. Something was coming. I could feel it. Then Emma leaned forward. Do you remember the bet? My stomach sank. There are certain memories the human brain should be allowed to delete. That was one of them. Which bet? The one you lost. I don't remember losing anything. You remember. I don't. Lily's smile widened. You're lying. I took a slow drink of coffee. Unfortunately, the memory was returning. 1 month earlier, at a family picnic, we'd decided to race through an absurd obstacle course someone had built in the backyard. I had been confident. Too confident. I'd bragged. I'd laughed. I'd even declared that there was no possible way I could lose. Then I lost. Badly. And because apparently I had no survival instincts, I'd agreed to one final condition. The winners could choose my punishment. I had assumed they'd forget. They hadn't. Of course they hadn't. Emma folded her arms. We've decided on your challenge. The kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. I slowly lowered my coffee. What challenge? Lily practically bounced in her chair. You're going to be a girl for a day. I choked. Actually choked. Emma calmly moved the coffee away from me. Careful. I stared at them. Excuse me. A girl. For a day. No. You lost. I withdraw my participation. That's not how a bet works. I wasn't in my right mind. You were eating a hot dog. Exactly. I was distracted. Lily was laughing so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. I looked at Emma. She wasn't laughing. That was worse. You planned this. Obviously. How long? She hesitated. I stared at her. How long? A few weeks. My jaw dropped. A few weeks. Lily raised one finger. Technically, we started planning almost immediately. I put my face in my hands. This wasn't a prank. It was an operation. They had schedules. They had supplies. They had apparently held meetings. I spent the next 10 minutes presenting every argument I could think of. The bet was unfair. The rules were unclear. The punishment was excessive. There were probably legal issues. None of it worked. Finally, Emma said the one thing she knew I couldn't argue with. You gave us your word. I went quiet. That was the problem. She was right. Growing up, our parents had drilled one rule into all three of us. If you gave your word, you kept it. Even when you regretted it. Even when it was embarrassing. Even when you desperately wanted to crawl beneath the nearest piece of furniture and disappear. I looked at my sisters. They were waiting. I sighed. Fine. The reaction was immediate. Emma cheered. Lily nearly knocked over her pancakes. I instantly regretted everything. One day, I reminded them. One day, Emma agreed. No pictures. Absolutely not. Emma. She smiled innocently. Fine. That smile did not reassure me. The transformation was scheduled for 2 o'clock. The hours leading up to it passed strangely slowly. I tried distracting myself. It didn't work. I watched television. I checked my phone. I wandered around the house. Nothing helped. Every time I passed a mirror, I caught myself staring at my reflection. Same face. Same red hair. Same person I'd been looking at for years. And yet I couldn't stop wondering what I was going to see later. At exactly 2 o'clock, someone knocked on my bedroom door. 3 seconds passed. Then Emma's voice. It's time. I stared at the door. Those 3 words somehow sounded like a death sentence. Coming. I wasn't. Now. I sighed. Fine. I opened the door. Emma stood in the hallway. Lily was behind her. Neither of them was laughing. That immediately made me nervous. They led me to Emma's room. When she opened the door, I stopped. The bed was covered with clothes. Not random clothes. Carefully selected clothes. There were accessories arranged in neat rows. A makeup bag. A brush. Shoes positioned beside the bed as if someone had prepared a stage. I stared. Then I looked at them. You've got to be kidding me. Emma smiled. We may have taken this seriously. May have. Lily shrugged. Okay. We definitely took it seriously. I stepped into the room. This wasn't some ridiculous costume. That was the first thing I noticed. The outfit was actually nice. Simple. Elegant. Normal. Somehow, that made it worse. If they'd chosen something absurd, I could have laughed. I could have treated the whole thing like a joke. But this felt strangely real. You planned all of this? Emma nodded. Of course. Why? Lily's expression softened. Because if we're going to do something, we might as well do it properly. I didn't know what to say to that. For the first time, I realized something. They weren't trying to humiliate me. They weren't trying to make me miserable. They were excited. They wanted this to be memorable. And somehow, that made it easier. Not easy. Just easier. I took a breath. Fine. Emma smiled. That's what I like to hear. Don't get excited. Too late. The next hour disappeared into a blur. Instructions. Laughter. Adjustments. Complaints. More adjustments. At first, I couldn't stop thinking about myself. How I was standing. How I was moving. Where I was looking. Every tiny gesture suddenly felt important. I became painfully aware of my own body. The mirror across the room didn't help. Every few minutes, I caught another glimpse of myself. A small change here. Another there. Nothing dramatic. Not yet. But enough. Enough to make me pause. Enough to make me look twice. Strangely, my sisters weren't laughing as much as I'd expected. They teased me, obviously. They were still my sisters. But whenever I became uncomfortable, they noticed. Whenever I hesitated, they slowed down. Whenever I looked like I wanted to escape through the window, they somehow made me laugh. There was a difference between being laughed at and being laughed with. I hadn't expected to notice it. But I did. As the afternoon sunlight shifted across the room, the mood changed. The jokes became quieter. The room became calmer. And I found myself looking at the mirror more often. That was when something unexpected happened. I started thinking. Not about the clothes. Not about the bet. Not even about my sisters. About me. Who was I when nobody expected me to behave a certain way? How much of the person I showed the world was actually me? And how much of it was simply a role I'd been playing for so long that I'd forgotten it was a role? The questions came quietly. I didn't invite them. They came anyway. I tried to ignore them. They stayed. Eventually, Emma stepped back. Lily stepped back beside her. The room went silent. I knew what that meant. The final reveal. My stomach tightened. Neither of them said anything. Emma simply gestured toward the mirror. Go ahead. I didn't move. For some reason, that final step felt harder than everything that came before it. As long as I didn't look, I could still imagine anything. The moment I looked, I'd have an answer. I took one step. Then another. Then another. Finally, I stood in front of the mirror. And froze. For a moment, my mind went completely blank. The person staring back at me was unmistakably me. The same eyes. The same face. The same nervous expression. Even the slight tilt of my head when I was confused was still there. And yet, something was different. Not enough to make me unrecognizable. Enough to make me question what I'd expected to see. I had imagined laughing. I had imagined making some stupid joke. I had imagined immediately demanding that my sisters undo everything. Instead, I just stood there. Silent. Behind me, Emma and Lily didn't say a word. For once, they gave me space. And that was when I realized what was bothering me. The transformation wasn't frightening because I looked different. It was frightening because I didn't hate what I saw. I had expected embarrassment. I had expected discomfort. Maybe even anger. But I didn't feel any of those things. At least, not exactly. I felt confused. Curious. Thoughtful. And somehow, that was much harder to explain. You okay? Emma finally asked. I blinked. Yeah. She studied my reflection. You sure? I looked at myself again. Then I nodded. I think so. It wasn't the whole truth. But it was the closest answer I had. Because I wasn't upset. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't thrilled. I was standing in front of a mirror, looking at someone who was still completely me. And wondering why, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually seeing myself. What I was feeling wasn't exactly fear anymore. It was perspective. A completely different way of seeing things. For most of my life, I'd moved through the world without giving much thought to the way I presented myself. I wore whatever felt comfortable. I behaved the way I always had. I followed routines simply because they were familiar. I'd never stopped to ask why. Then, in the span of a single afternoon, all of those familiar patterns were interrupted. And sometimes, interruptions reveal things. Not always huge, life-altering truths. Sometimes, they simply make you notice the details you'd stopped seeing. Lily studied me for a moment before smiling. You know what? What? You handled this way better than I thought you would. I stared at her. That sounds suspiciously like an insult. It's a compliment. From you? That's even more suspicious. She laughed. I couldn't help it. I laughed too. Something inside me finally loosened. For the first time that day, I stopped thinking about my reflection. I stopped worrying about whether I looked strange. I stopped analyzing every little movement. And when I finally stopped trying so hard to feel comfortable, I discovered something I hadn't expected. I actually was comfortable. I was having fun. Real fun. Not the kind you pretend to have because everyone else is laughing. Not the kind you force yourself into because you don't want to ruin the mood. I was genuinely enjoying myself. Somewhere along the way, the challenge had stopped feeling like a punishment. It had become an adventure. A bizarre, ridiculous, completely unexpected adventure. My sisters noticed immediately. Emma pointed at me. Oh, no. I frowned. What? You're getting comfortable. Is that supposed to be a bad thing? Absolutely. Why? Because we're losing control of the situation. Lily gasped. He's adapting. That was enough to send all three of us into another fit of laughter. The anxiety that had followed me since morning wasn't gone. But it had weakened. And sometimes, that's all you need. A little room to breathe. A little space between yourself and your fears. Unfortunately, my newfound confidence lasted approximately 5 minutes. Then Emma announced the next phase of their plan. We're going out. My smile disappeared. No. Yes. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes. You can't be serious. We've already decided. I looked at Lily. She nodded. Traitor. How long have you two been planning this? Long enough, Emma said. That wasn't an answer. But by then, I already knew arguing was pointless. When Emma and Lily agreed on something, stopping them was like trying to hold back the ocean with your hands. Eventually, I gave in. An hour later, we were walking through town. Or, more accurately, my sisters were walking through town. I was conducting an internal emergency meeting with myself. Every few seconds, I became convinced someone was staring at me. That person over there. The couple across the street. The woman walking behind us. The man who glanced in my direction for approximately half a second. My mind turned every ordinary movement into evidence. They are looking. They know. They are judging. I knew, logically, that none of it made sense. People had their own lives. Their own problems. Their own destinations. Nobody had time to spend their afternoon analyzing a stranger. But anxiety doesn't care about logic. Anxiety tells stories. And the story in my head was getting louder with every step. At one point, I seriously considered asking my sisters to turn around. Then something happened. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No one stopped. No one stared. No one gasped. No one pointed. The world didn't react because the world didn't care. Cars continued moving through traffic. Friends walked together, talking about things that had nothing to do with me. Families crossed the street. People checked their phones. Someone laughed loudly outside a store. A child dropped an ice cream cone and reacted as though the greatest tragedy in human history had just occurred. Life continued. Completely ordinary. And somehow, that was beautiful. I realized I'd been carrying an enormous amount of fear for something that existed almost entirely inside my own mind. The fear was real. The judgment wasn't. That distinction stayed with me. By the time we reached a small cafe, I noticed my shoulders had relaxed. My breathing had slowed. Even the tight feeling in my chest was beginning to disappear. I sat beside the window while Emma and Lily went to order our drinks. Outside, sunlight stretched across the pavement. People passed by in every direction. Inside, the cafe was filled with the soft noise of conversations, clinking cups, and quiet laughter. For the first time that day, I felt completely calm. Not because I'd suddenly discovered some grand truth about myself. Not because I'd figured everything out. I'd simply stopped fighting the experience. The mirror had shown me a different version of my appearance. The outside world had shown me something far more important. Most fears grow when we hide from them. They shrink when we finally face them. I thought that was the lesson of the day. I was wrong. Because the next moment would challenge me in a way no mirror ever could. The cafe was supposed to be easy. We'd already survived the walk through town. I'd confronted my fear of being seen. Surely the worst was over. Apparently, the universe disagreed. Emma and Lily were sitting across from me, talking about completely ordinary things. Movies. Weekend plans. A concert one of their friends wanted to attend. Their conversation was so normal that, little by little, I stopped thinking about myself. I wasn't wondering who was watching. I wasn't checking reflections in windows. I wasn't analyzing how I was sitting. I was just there. Existing. And strangely enough, it felt wonderful. Then I heard someone call my sisters' names. All three of us turned. A group of their friends had just walked through the cafe door. My stomach dropped. Of course. Of course this would happen. Apparently, the universe had decided my day wasn't complicated enough. Emma looked surprised. Lily looked surprised too. That meant this wasn't part of the plan. Somehow, that made it worse. Their friends walked toward us, laughing and talking. I immediately began calculating my escape routes. There weren't any. I couldn't hide beneath the table. I couldn't vanish. I couldn't suddenly develop the ability to teleport. One of the girls looked at me. Then she looked at Emma. Then back at me. I braced myself. Instead, she smiled. Who's your friend? That's it. That was the question. Simple. Normal. Completely harmless. And yet it caught me off guard. My sisters exchanged a glance. I knew that glance. It was the glance they gave each other when they were about to make my life unnecessarily difficult. Lily opened her mouth. Actually. I pointed at her. Don't. Her smile widened. That only made everyone more curious. The truth eventually came out. And then the table exploded. Not with cruelty. Not with mockery. With genuine surprise. People demanded explanations. Someone insisted that Emma and Lily had to be making the whole story up. Another person wanted to know how I'd managed to agree to such a ridiculous bet. One girl laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. I waited for the embarrassment to hit. It never did. Because nobody was laughing at me. They were laughing at the sheer absurdity of the situation. There was a difference. A very important difference. For years, I'd assumed that being vulnerable meant becoming a target. I'd believed that if people saw me outside my usual comfort zone, they'd judge me. But sitting there, surrounded by people who were curious rather than cruel, I realized something. People are often kinder than our fears predict. The truth can be less frightening than the effort required to hide it. That thought settled somewhere inside me. Quietly. Like a seed. The afternoon continued. Conversations wandered from one topic to another. Stories were exchanged. People talked about their lives. And slowly, I stopped thinking of myself as the center of the room. Because I wasn't. Nobody was. Everyone carried their own worries. Their own insecurities. Their own private battles. One person admitted she hated public speaking. Another confessed that job interviews made her physically sick with nerves. Someone else talked about constantly worrying about what strangers thought of her online. Different fears. Same feeling. The more I listened, the more I understood something I'd never really considered before. Almost everyone is carrying something invisible. We just don't see it. And realizing that made the world feel strangely smaller. Kinder. More connected. Eventually, the group said goodbye and left. The cafe became quieter. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its slow descent toward evening. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk. Emma looked at me. You're different. I frowned. Different how? She smiled. You tell me. I looked toward the window. Was I different? Maybe. But not because of the clothes. Not because of the transformation. The day hadn't turned me into someone else. It had simply made me notice parts of myself I'd been ignoring. I'd spent years worrying about perception. About expectations. About fitting into the role people expected me to play. Yet the moments I remembered most weren't the moments in front of the mirror. They were the moments when I'd forgotten the mirror existed. The laughter. The conversations. The walk through town. The moment I realized nobody was watching me nearly as closely as I imagined. The moment I stopped being afraid. The mirror had mattered. But it wasn't the lesson. It had only been the doorway. The real lesson was waiting somewhere beyond appearance. Beyond assumptions. Beyond the endless question of what other people might think. As evening approached, Emma suggested we head home. I agreed. The walk back felt completely different. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. The people were the same. Nothing around me had changed. And yet, somehow, everything felt different. Or maybe I had. Not dramatically. Not permanently. Just enough. Enough to notice things I hadn't noticed before. As we walked beneath the golden light of sunset, I caught my reflection in a shop window. Earlier that day, I would have looked away. Now, I smiled. For the first time, the reflection didn't feel like a question. It felt like an answer. Not an answer about identity. Not an answer about becoming someone else. Just an answer about acceptance. A reminder that stepping outside your comfort zone doesn't make you less of yourself. Sometimes, it reveals more of you. I thought the day was finally coming to an end. I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. The final conversation waiting for us at home would change the meaning of everything that had happened. The drive home was quieter. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. The kind of silence that settles over people after they've experienced something they know they'll remember for years. The sunset painted the city in gold and amber. Buildings glowed in the fading light. Trees stretched long shadows across the streets. Everything looked softer. Maybe the city had changed. Or maybe I was simply seeing it differently. I sat in the back seat, watching the world pass by. Emma drove. Lily sat beside her, scrolling through pictures on her phone. Every few minutes, she'd laugh. Then she'd quickly stop. Then she'd laugh again. Eventually, I gave up pretending I hadn't noticed. What? Lily looked innocent. Nothing. That means it's definitely something. She turned around and held up her phone. The screen was filled with photographs from the day. Some were ridiculous. Some were surprisingly ordinary. Others captured moments I didn't even remember happening. There was one of me laughing at the cafe. Another showed the three of us walking down the street together. Then I saw a photograph that made me stop. I stared at it. It had been taken earlier that afternoon. I was standing in front of the mirror. But I wasn't looking at my appearance. I was looking at my reflection. There was a difference. One was about how I looked. The other was about what I was thinking. The person in the photograph looked thoughtful. Almost emotional. I couldn't look away. That's a strange picture, I said quietly. Emma glanced at me through the rearview mirror. That's my favorite. Why? Neither sister answered immediately. Then Emma spoke. Because that's the moment you stopped fighting it. Her words stayed with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe she wasn't. But something about them felt true. The rest of the drive passed quickly. Soon, we were pulling into the driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had. Familiar. Safe. Comforting. And yet, when I stepped out of the car, I knew I wasn't quite the same person who had walked out that morning. I wasn't transformed. I wasn't reinvented. I hadn't suddenly figured out who I was. I simply felt larger. As if my understanding of myself had expanded by a few inches. Inside, the house was quiet. Our parents were visiting relatives and weren't expected back until later. We kicked off our shoes. Dropped our bags. Returned to the familiar rhythm of home. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then Lily sat down on the couch. And became serious. That got my attention immediately. Lily was many things. Serious was rarely one of them. Emma noticed too. The room slowly fell silent. Lily looked at both of us. Can I tell you something? Emma nodded. Of course. Lily hesitated. That alone made me nervous. She took a slow breath. When we planned all of this, I thought today was going to be funny. I smiled. That's fair. She shook her head. No. Listen. Her voice was softer now. I thought we'd laugh. We'd take pictures. We'd embarrass you a little. Mission accomplished. Lily ignored me. But somewhere during the day. She paused. Her eyes moved between Emma and me. I started noticing something. The room became completely still. And suddenly, I realized that whatever she was about to say wasn't part of the joke. It wasn't part of the bet. It wasn't part of the plan. For the first time that day, I had no idea what was coming next. And somehow, I knew it was going to matter.